Hi folks, Slick Slices here. Now, I've got a very special knife to show you today, which is this one. It's made by Jacklore. Jacklore is a guy called Sandy Jack, who's a guy that works from his home and lives in Wiltshire in England. And he makes a relatively limited range of knives, but to a really, really high quality. Predominantly, and the reason it's Jacklore really is because he makes a sort of clone of the Woodlaw knife, and that is like the archetypal sort of bushcraft knife these days. Sandy makes a version of it, which is probably at least as good as the original Allen Wood version. The handle's a little bit different. I mean, to the casual observer, they probably look very, very similar, but it's the care and quality that Sandy puts into it that marks his knives out from others. They're also remarkably well priced, considering the amount of time and effort that Sandy puts into them. But the downside to all of that is that the supply is very, very limited. It took me about 3 years to get hold of one, and it took a lot of emails, a lot of time, a lot of patience, but it was well worth it in the end. Plus, I've got relatively large hands, and the Woodlaw size of knife. No, this isn't a Woodlaw. This is an Arthur Wright version, but you know it's big enough for my hand, but I find them a little bit on the thin side and the handle a little bit on the short side. So I opted for Sandy's camp knife, and that's what this is. So this is a larger version. I should say, before I even take it out of the sheath, everything that on this knife is handmade by Sandy. The only exception is the lanyard, which I did, but the everything else is entirely done by Sandy at home. All of this beautiful stitching, this really, really quite stiff and solid sheath, really nice done. And of course, I asked him for a left-handed one. I'm not really left-handed, but I need to draw and sheath the knife on the left hand because my right hand is pretty paralysed. Although I do fine cutting things, as bizarre as it may seem, I do fine cutting tasks with my right hand. Anyway, so the beautiful sheath. In fact, why don't we just look at that first? I'll take the knife out. It's very nicely wet formed. Come back to the knife in a minute. Don't worry, it won't be going anywhere. He does these danglers. You can put the knife on a belt and pull the brass D-ring down like that. The dangler itself is held on with press studs, so you can remove it if you don't want to use it. I like it. My only criticism of the dangler is that if you put that on your belt, stiff, with the studs, the way it sort of comes and the way it's sort of supposed to be, I find that sometimes I catch this bit and I undo the studs. So what I tend to do is put it on my belt with the dangler reversed, so this is the outside and the studs are between the belt and my trousers. It's slightly more difficult to put that on like that, but once it's on, it's secure. Plus, of course, you get a nice wee Jacklore mark on the outside there with the white horse. Yeah, good solid scabbard, and Sandy wet forms them before he sends them out, which is a good thing, because when I wet formed the sheath for this one, I ended up getting rust on the blade because I didn't do it properly, and Sandy does. So anyway, that's the scabbard, and here is the knife. Now, as I say, it sort of looks like a Bushlaw Woodlaw knife, but the scale is a little bit different. Now, this isn't quite a Woodlaw style knife, but it's the size that I'm really comparing it for here, just so you can see one against the other. This may only be an inch longer, or an inch and a quarter longer, but it is a very, very much more substantial knife. So much so that I think it requires a companion knife to go with it. And I think these two make a pair because this is a proper zero Scandi grind, which is brilliant for wood processing and so forth. But it's not so good for things like food prep, where I find a flat grind works better. It doesn't sort of explode your food so much. If you're chopping vegetables or fruit, the flat grind works better. But for terms of biting into wood, can't beat that. So anyway, I'll just sort of run through this knife. It's made of 01 tool steel. Now, 01 tool steel is maybe not the most exotic of materials. I mean, this is also 01 tool steel. But, as with any steel, it is the heat treatment that really makes the difference. If you've got a good quality steel, and 01 is a good quality steel, you then have to think about how it's heat treated. And Sandy is the master of the heat treat. He spent a lot of time concentrating on that as a major thing. And he does a hardening cycle where he hardens the knife up to well into the 60s Rockwell. He then tests the hardness of it, and then he does, I think it's a 3-stage tempering cycle to bring the hardness back down to slightly anneal the steel so that it comes out with a Rockwell of 59. And he believes that that's the perfect Rockwell for a knife of this type. If you have it too hard, it becomes too brittle. If you have it too soft, it doesn't retain its edge for very long. Another thing he does is that he hardens the knife before he does the Scandi grind. And the important thing about that is that he can do his hardness check on the part of the steel where the actual edge is. Because to do a proper Rockwell test, he has his own Rockwell tester, you really need steel that's parallel. If you tried to do it on a wedge-shaped full flat grind blade like this, you don't get a true reading. What you'd have to do is to do the hardness test sort of on the ricasso or somewhere here. The problem with that is that that's not the hardened edge. And of course, when you're heat treating a knife and when you're quenching it, you are trying to get this bit hard and keep the tang softer so that it's more resilient. Now, so by doing the grind after the Rockwell, he can actually test on this part of the knife where the actual blade is, and he can tell then that he's got the exact right hardness. This bit. Then he does the final grind, and you don't see the mark. So unlike, say, this knife, where this is individually Rockwell tested, you see just by my thumb there's a little pit mark, and that's where the Rockwell hardness has been tested. Now, this being a flat ground knife, you can probably assume that that's probably not that accurate either. But nonetheless, so Andy takes a lot of time to do that, and then these blades are ground on a belt grinder, but by hand, by Sandy. He's got a sort of jig for doing it, but he does them one at a time to make sure that they're absolutely right. And then they're hand sanded. They're also incredibly sharp. This is one of the sharpest knives I've ever had out of the box. It's a proper, true zero Scandi grind, and it is proper sticky sharp. Really, really good. Anything else I want to tell you about the blade? Oh, I should tell you it's 4mm steel, so it's nice and thick and solid. But as we move into the handle, it has a subtle taper. So as you get towards this end, it tapers down to about 3mm, and that is just in order to keep the balance of the knife forward, so it's a good chopping knife, and it also keeps the overall weight down despite it having that chunky, thick steel. So it's a classic drop point bushcraft woodlaw style. It's slightly different to the woodlaw in that here we have, instead of just having something that might have been shaped more like this, which sort of, you've got a swell at the bottom of the handle here to keep you safe. You've got this sort of what amounts to almost a little guard here, and I actually really like that, because the danger of your hand slipping down onto an edge is always a worry, but when the edge is as sharp as this, you really don't want to get your finger too close to it, because you're gonna cut yourself. It does also mean you've got this sort of finger trial for close-up work if you really want to, but I would be very worried that my finger would slip onto there. You know, people talk about razor sharp and finger popping, hair popping sharp and so forth. This is as sharp as any knife I've ever had out of the box. Seriously, seriously good stuff. I mean, it's in the realm of the Rocksteads and things like that. Right, move on to the handle. As I say, the first thing, we've got a tapered tang. Now, this might not seem very obvious, and if you're interested in this, go and look on Sandy's YouTube channel. He has some really good chat about how things work and why they work. So the handle is tapered, but that also means that the tang is tapered, but it also means that the handles are tapered, so that the grain of the wood is parallel on one side of the handle to the other, this side and that side. The grains are parallel. It's a thing that is sort of, it's so much unnecessary and so much hard work. You have to wonder why, but the reason why is because Sandy wants to produce knives that are perfect and not just not bad. So this knife is done in that way. We've got red G10 liners here, and these are all epoxied. And one of the things Sandy does with the when he's fixing the handle to the knife is that he drills several holes through the blade tang and through the liners, so that there is and into the back of the handle scales, so that there is somewhere for the epoxy to sit, so that it's not all squeezed out when you clamp the two sides of the handle together and do them up. I mean, there's an art even in that, in that if you over tighten the handles, you'll squeeze all the glue out and it's all gone. And though you might have spread a ton of epoxy in there, if you've squeezed it all out, the handles will still fall off. By doing it just the right amount of tightness, you make sure that it's all close fitting, but you make sure that the glue isn't all squeezed out. Now, the wood in this case is desert ironwood, which is one of my favourite woods. And that brings up another little question. Sandy does a great deal of stabilising of his wood, which he does with cactus juice. He has a system which involves using both pressure and vacuum in order to make sure that you drive all of the epoxy that the cactus juice is right deep into the knife, and make sure that it's absolutely, truly stabilised all the way through. And that means that the handle scales will almost never rot or crack or whatever. That being said, I don't believe this is stabilised. And that's because I don't think you can stabilise desert ironwood. Now, I didn't ask Sandy specifically about this one, but I am of the belief from watching several of his videos, he doesn't stabilise desert ironwood because it's just too dense. And so there's no point. There's nothing to gain from it, and it's very difficult, if not impossible, to do. So the handle, as I say, is epoxied onto the tang and the liners, but then it's also held with two loveless bolts. He does really nice mosaic pins, and if there's one thing that I'm not happy with this, no, I'm not happy with it. If there's one thing I would change about this knife, is that I would have the mosaic pins. They're not as strong because they're just epoxied in and there's no mechanical screw thread that's holding them together. This is much tougher. This is a more practical, usable knife. But to be honest, with epoxying is that strong, and with the mosaic pins going through and the brass lanyard tube going through, there isn't really any danger that they're ever going to fall apart. So, it's not something I worry about, but just from an aesthetic point of view, I think that the mosaic pins are beautiful. He makes his mosaic pins himself as well. You take a brass tube and then you put brass rods and tubes into that tube, and then you fill the space with epoxy, and then you put it under pressure to make sure that you drive all that epoxy right the way through and you don't end up with any bubbles or air gaps inside it. And then you slice them up and make them into pins. There's a couple of videos on his YouTube about doing exactly that. So I'm just trying to think what else I can do. Oh, the shaping of the knife. The shaping is all done by hand. It's a proper Coke bottle shape. There is a little bit more. Hold on, let me get my other hand up here. And my hand doesn't work desperately well, but I'll get it up here. There's more shaping goes into this than, say, the Arthur Wright bushcraft knife. The Arthur Wright one, it's fine, but it's relatively straightforward. This has a really quite a marked Coke bottle shape. It's nice and thin up this end, so you can use a pinch grip and so forth. There's a good swell in it to keep it in your hand, and there's a good sort of expanded pommel area at this end, so that if you were chopping, there's no danger that the knife's going to fly out of your hand. Now I've fitted a little braided leather lanyard on here, which I just made one night, and it I made one for each of the two knives, and it seems to work well. And this is a better size of handle for my hand. It's not so much larger, but it's large enough, but it's girthy, and that's sort of quite important to my. I wear an extra large glove, so that sort of suits me better than this. But this makes a better knife for, say, sort of food prep and things like that. Now I don't have a great deal of bushcraft knives to sort of compare this to. I'm not really a bushcrafter, let's face it. My bushcrafting days, I'm in a wheelchair nowadays. My idea of going out in the countryside is generally in a car to sit and look at it, look at the countryside, rather than getting out making bonfires and so forth. I do have, though, a couple of others. This here, there's a video on this one. There's a video on this as well on my channel. This one here is sort of in some ways comparable. It's obviously smaller. It's the sort of 4-inch size, the same sort of size as the bushcraft, the woodlaw knife. But this is a Falkneven Tre Corona, the 3 crowns. The Falkneven Embla. The reason I'm pulling this one out, though, is this is also desert ironwood. And desert ironwood can look so different from one knife to the next, but it is one of my favourite materials. It's very dense, it's very strong, it can have lovely grain patterns in it. This one is very, very dark, and it has a very solid, workman-like grain pattern to it. You kind of feel like you could take that knife to work every day and it would never let you down. I'm sure the Falkneven is equally tough, but it kind of has that sort of pretty look about it. And then, of course, I have other I've got lots of desert ironwood knives, but I've got others which show a contrast here. And this one here is a desert ironwood burl in a Barlow, and that's beautiful grain pattern. I mean, what I wouldn't give to have a pattern like that on a knife like this, but it's you can dream about perfection, but honestly, this knife is as close to perfection as you're ever going to get. Now, the one thing that perhaps might be slightly questionable about this whole thing is this knife any more capable, or any of these expensive knives any more capable than a Mora? And this Mora is a sort of 60 quid Mora, so middle of the range. It's not one of the basic ones, it's not the most expensive one, but somewhere in the middle. This one was particularly attractive. It belongs to a friend of mine, it's not mine. He bought a Tormek sharpener, and this came for free, and there's a video on this knife as well. But is one of these posh bushcrafting knives any more capable than the Mora? And the answer is probably not. This will do just as much. It's almost as sharp, and could be as sharp if it's never been sharpened. Obviously it's got the black coating, and you lose that the minute you start sharpening a Scandi. This isn't a Scandi, by the way, this is a convex grind, which actually I like on a smaller knife. I'm not sure about the bigger knife. But yes, the Mora is probably Moras are probably just as capable, but they're never going to be as beautiful as this. But the thing that really makes a difference with a Sandy jackknife is this. Now, this is it's not quite the bushcraft. They do a Scandi grind version, and it retails, depending on the wood that you have, between about 130 and 200 pounds, I think. If you wanted it in desert ironwood, you'd be looking at around the 200 pound mark. This from Falkneven, which is it's a machine-made, Japanese-made knife, will retail a little over the 200 pounds mark, 240, 250 pounds. But you can buy this handmade beauty in all its magnificence for about £340, I think it was, all in £345, including delivery. And honestly, I just think that is such stunning value for money. It might be more expensive than the Embla, and it's certainly a lot more expensive than a Mora, but considering that this is a handmade knife by a craftsman in his own workshop, in his home, and he turns out maybe 3 or 4 or 5 knives in a week, a busy week he might turn out 6, to get it for that price is absolutely phenomenal. And that is why, it's one of the reasons, it's not the only reason why, but it's one of the reasons why his knives are so popular and oversubscribed. It is very, very difficult to get one of these knives. As I say, it took me about 3 years of... there's occasionally he puts one up for sale on his website, and it will be sold within 2 or 3 minutes. And I'm not joking, it's literally 2 or 3 minutes. If you try waiting 10 minutes, as I did, you're too slow. But it's worth going anyway, because even if you've missed out by a little bit, he tends to take the next 2 or 3 people and offer them a knife. And that was quite good, because normally he puts a knife up on YouTube and that's it, up on his website, and that's it. That is the knife you're going to get, and it may have ironwood, or it may have yew wood, or it may have oak, or whatever. But whatever it comes up, that's what you're getting. And it will usually have a right-hand sheath as well. But I was able to say, I would really love one in desert ironwood, and I was able to say, I would really like a left-handed sheath, please. And he made that. I didn't have to put down a deposit or anything, because he doesn't take orders. He made it. I did also ask for the mosaic pins. Well, you can't have everything. He made this knife up, and he said he put it up on his YouTube channel, and he said, Eric, if you want it, you can have this one. He says half, but obviously it means you can buy it. So I jumped at it. There was no way I was going to turn it down. I mean, I probably sound like I'm really missing the mosaic pins, but honestly, I just love this knife. This is an absolutely fantastic knife. It's one of the best knives I own. It's one of the very few genuinely custom-made knives that are absolutely 100% handmade by an artisan. As I say, you know, the sheath, the dangler, the stabilization of the wood if it's done, the hardening of the steel, the grind, the cutting out of the blank, everything is done in-house by one man. The sanding and polishing of the blade is done by hand. The you know, the stamping in of the badge is done by hand. The taper is done by hand. I mean, he's made himself jigs, but he handmade the jigs, so you can't criticise for that. And it is just a stunning knife, and I think this will give years and years of service. I just am really ashamed in a way that I'm never going to give it the hard use that it deserves. It deserves to be really used hard. I am hoping that one day he'll make me a small companion knife, one of his wasps, to go with it. And it's difficult. You don't want to press for these things because, you know, the man has his own life to live and his own issues to live with. If you watch his website, if you watch his YouTube channel, you'll see some of the issues that he has to live with, and he does have some fairly serious problems. But the other thing that I like about Sandy is he has 2 Spanish rescue dogs, and I have a Spanish rescue dog, Arnie, who features in many of my videos. He likes to chat. He's never seen in public, but he talks to people, and he does his Chewbacca impressions. He looks like Chewbacca and he sounds like Chewbacca, but he's a dog. So I'm very fond of the Spanish rescue dogs, and Sandy has 2, which he got relatively recently after he lost his 2 Jack Russells that he'd had for a long time. So he's 2. It's worth having a look. There is the Jacklore YouTube channel, and there's also another one called Wiltshire Man, where he does sort of camping trips and things, where you actually see some of the stuff, some of his knives in use. He makes the Woodlaw sort of copy, which he calls the classic. Is a camp knife, which is this. He does a thing called the BB, which is a more of a sort of Skinner knife. It's got a sort of shorter blade and a slightly bigger handle than the classic. And then he makes 3 smaller knives: the Wasp, the Wisp. The Wisp is the smallest one, then the Wasp, and then there's another one, which I can't remember. And then he makes the odd kitchen knife and things, but the volume of output is so small that he never makes very many of any of them. So, you know, you may get yourself a GEC knife and think it's one of a run of 100. I would be surprised if Sandy has produced many more. I doubt he's produced 100 camp knives in all the years he's been making them. He'll have made more than that of the classics, but the camp knife is one that's relatively rare. So, you know, as a collectible. I mean, not that I have any intention of selling this, but generally speaking, whatever you pay for a Jacklore knife, you can probably sell it in pristine condition, but on the second-hand market for double what you pay for it. Personally, I think Sandy should put his prices up, but I think he'd rather keep his prices down and try and control who they go to and make sure that they go to people who, you know, in inverted commas, deserve them, will use them, will treasure them, and not people who are just going to buy them and sell them on. Anyway, I've whittled on for half an hour about this knife, and there are good reasons for that, because it is an absolutely stunning knife. I'll do a shorter video as well, which will just run over it in a sort of 5 to 10 minute format. But I did this because there will be people out there who will appreciate the Jacklore camp knife. So if you do like this stuff, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see any more of my videos, then please remember to subscribe and to ring that notification bell. Thank you very much. Bye.